members are doing in the International Scientific Committee. So as you know, ICOMOS Canada is a part of a bigger organization, ICOMOS International. And on the international level, there are several international scientific committees that are dedicated to very specific expertise, such as rock art, wood conservation, wood architecture conservation, cultural landscapes, and or cultural tourism. So we have asked some of the Canadian experts taking part in those international scientific committees to present the work they're doing in those international committees. And the first conference was a few weeks ago given by Fergus McLaren, who talked about the International Committee on Cultural Tourism. And today we have the pleasure to listen to Mario Santana Quintero, who is going to enlighten us about the work SIPA is doing at the international level. Mario is a professor at the University of Carleton, cross-appointed to the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and the Azrieli School of Architecture and Urbanism, which are both in the Faculty of Engineering and Design at Carleton. He served a few years ago, for a few years, as the Secretary General of ICOMOS International, so the big association. He's actually the treasurer of ICOMOS Canada and a member of the board for many years, and the honorary president of the Scientific Committee on Heritage Documentation, SIPA, which he's going to talk about. He has collaborated in several international projects in heritage documentation with the Getty Conservation Institute, UNESCO, amongst others. And we're very fortunate to have Mario today with us because it's such a traveler that it's sometimes complicated to know in which country he is. So thank you again, Mario, and to you.
Thank you so much, Mathieu, for your kind introduction. Too kind, I would say, about my affiliation and my work. And I would like also to obviously to thank ICOMOS Canada for this, privilege to talk to you this afternoon. And I hope that you can remain with me, although I know that you might be having lunch, or you will have lunch after my lecture, or maybe you had before. I would like to thank Catherine and Michael and Marisa for the help to put together the presentation, the graphics, etc. I'm very thankful, for them to put together this initiative in which we have the opportunity to share some of our kind of life-changing experience with ICOMOS. And I will try to do that today throughout my lecture, but I wanted to go into a kind of chronology adventure about documentation, about the need, and then, show you some of the projects that I have been involved and activities, and then conclude with some ideas. I would also like to invite you to the next big activity of the SIPA Heritage Documentation Committee, and I will mention that at the end of the presentation. So before I start, I would like to thank two of my important mentors that unfortunately are no longer with us. So Michael Jansen and Robin Letelier. Michael, who was a German professor, and he was instrumental in my career. And Robin, who was actually instrumental for me to be in Canada. And I'm very thankful to both of them to provide these opportunities. And I think that that's also a message for ICOMOS. ICOMOS members, we are kind of, when we reach a certain age, we are more facilitators of experiences than we are experience those things ourselves. And obviously, I would like to thank my family because they're very tolerant with me, with my travel, with my, going from one place to the other, and also very tolerant for me to continue this commitment, to the documentation and the conservation of cultural heritage. So I am part of the Carleton Immersive Media Studio, and I also would like to thank my colleagues there, in particular, Stephen Fay, Laurie Smith, and Lara Shope, that have been very supportive throughout these many years, 12 years since I joined the SIMS lab. And In the Sims Lab, throughout these 12 years, we have been blessed with many important partners, and we have conducted many projects. And I would like to acknowledge that many of the images that you're going to see belong to these projects and these organizations, and in particular to the Getty Conservation Institute, who has been a major, collaborator, or we have been collaborating with them for many years. And these projects have brought us to many places, and we have been able to share experiences and collaborate and contribute to the ongoing efforts internationally to the conservation by providing prompt and accurate records for that type of work. So today I'm going to talk about why documenting heritage places, why a lifetime, why challenging, and why doing all this. And that's when I reflect about people joining the SIPA Heritage Documentation Committee. So obviously we need to record sites, right? And for the activities of conservation, for the activities of preserving the sites, for managing changes, etc. And some examples of that, we have worked, I'm going to show you some images of the project. So this is, for instance, working in the Venus Mill in Yukon with our partners from the government of Yukon. And there, we were recording a site that might unfortunately disappeared for one or other reason due to, environmental pressures and other issues. So we need to document this site so we can preserve the knowledge and the values of the site for posterity. Or working, for instance, in the Tarot Garden with the Getty Conservation Institute at the Leakage and File Foundation to record a site that is not extremely old, but highly important, and that has these conservation requirements, for its management, for the upkeeping, etc. So that's really important. Or we were recently in Ukraine, one of my colleagues, Mikel Reina and myself, and there we were providing, documentation and technical assistance to understand the needs of documenting places in areas of conflict. So documenting heritage places has involved a process, a workflow, and that process might involve different activities, like planning activities, acquisition, processing, delivering some products, using the data for monitoring, simulating some aspects, digitally speaking, and then also archiving for posterity those files. And according to Letelier's guiding principles, why do we do this kind of work? To acquire knowledge, to promote the interest, to permit informed decisions, in the conservation field, and to also, they could be to a certain extent considered as a kind of insurance policy in case things disappear. And when do we need to do this? Well, when we compile inventories, when we create heritage information systems, when we're making critical decisions before, during, after conservation works, when there is historical evidence appear of the place, when the sites are at risk, and when there will be maybe an adaptive reuse project, rehabilitation, etc. So we're going to change the function of the place. And in our line of work, we use these digital tools, and we call this digital heritage recording, which is all the forms of digital data capture that can be used for this type of work. And this is what I specialize. And this is also what SIPA Heritage Documentation Committee does in most of their activities and members. Now, why a lifetime? So in my early times, I want to show you some things of why did I became interested in this. I went to Leuven to the Masters in Conservation there at the Catholic University, and I started drawing, the St. Michael's Church in Leuven, and then I worked for my thesis on the three-dimensional modeling of the Castle of Arenberg and all projects to do the conservation. Later on, I was able to travel. Very early in my career, in 1997, I went to the Sultanate of Oman, and I was working in Al-Balid. I worked in the Roman Theater of Syria with the KU Leuven. The Al-Balid project was with the Aachen University under the direction of Michael Jansen, and I obtained very valuable knowledge. In 2001, I went to India, and I conducted, under the supervision of Michael Jansen again, a training for the Archaeological Survey of India. That was actually the first time this very important organization used digital and electronic topographic devices to record their cultural heritage. And I remember, for me, it was a very revealing experience. In 2002, I was blessed to join the documentation team to record the minaret jam in Afghanistan. We traveled for 2 days across very challenging landscapes to be able to record a site because the minaret was, in danger of collapsing. And then in 2003, we went to Bamiyan and actually conducted, under the direction of Michael Jansen and UNESCO, the first map of the Bamiyan Buddhas after the destruction in 2001. I have worked a lot, in training people, and in particular, I wanted to outline my work with the Welfare Association in Palestine, where we have been able to train over 200 Palestinian experts in documentation techniques, among other things. They have also done a lot of conservation projects. And then obviously joining Carleton University and the Carleton Immersive Media Studio in 2012, and starting teaching what I love, historic site recording and building pathology. And here some early of the images of my students working with me. And the start of the collaboration with the Getty Conservation Institute in 2012 that have taken us to many places. And in particular, in this case, I have to thank Claudia Cancino and Susan McDonald that have been really pioneers and helping us to collaborate with them meaningfully. So in my ICOMOS trajectory, it's interesting because I joined ICOMOS because I was forced to join it. I became a student of Leuven, and the first thing you need to do is join ICOMOS. Then I discovered there was this Heritage Documentation Committee, SIPA, because I was doing my PhD, and I joined SIPA in 2001. And for one or other reason, and this I would like to thank Robin Leterrier, I became a member of SIPA in 2005, and I was for a term vice president, for a term president. And then in 2014, I decided to step a little bit higher, and I became a member of the international board, and then later on vice president, and then secretary general. And obviously, being in Canada, I became an ICOMOS Canada member, board member, and then a few years ago, I was elected as treasurer, which is probably not the most exciting job, but really important. And in 2023, I want to thank my SIPA colleagues. I was nominated and acknowledged as honorary president of the committee, and I'm very happy. Obviously, I am also involved in many other things of ICOMOS. I am a member of CIF, the training committee, SCARSA E-Corp, the climate action, and the SDGs working groups. So in SIPA, we have so many pictures, but obviously this is one that reminds me of 2015 when we decided to propose Ottawa to be the venue of 2017, and with colleagues of the SIPA board and the support, with Stephen Fay and Christian Ouimet and Laurie Smith and Michelle Duon and many others, we were able to organize SIPA 2017 in Ottawa, which was really a blast of activities and things, and we organized and brought, the scientific committee to our territory. In 2019, we organized a panel on ethics of heritage documentation workshop, and this, I think, was a really interesting aspect. I have moved a bit from my original core of action in, working on workflows and digital workflows to also look at the ethics of a professional doing this kind of work, and we organized this panel. I have been also teaching for many years at the University of Leuven at the Raymond Lever International Center for Conservation as a visiting professor. So I remain linked to my alma mater. And there we have been organizing the Architectural Heritage Documentation for Conservation workshop. And now this October, we will have our 23rd workshop. And this is also supported by SIPA. So it's a great activity that have been able. And in Canada, I was directing the ENSA Create Heritage Engineering program that was able to train many Canadian colleagues that are now in private and government and non-for-profit. And this program was instrumental. And here I show one picture of Laurie Smith, who has been really instrumental in our work and in our support to conduct these activities. So why is it challenging recording and documenting historic sites? Well, there is a paradigm shift. In the beginning, when I started working with this type of things, we used like laser scanners, which were extremely big, extremely bulky, and also difficult to use and very expensive. And nowadays, we see this evolution of devices to capture three-dimensional point clouds of surfaces. in a relatively very short time and much more affordable. And then photogrammetry, for instance, the use of digital cameras. In the past, we had to use very sophisticated metric cameras. And today we're able to use even our mobile phones to capture data to record the condition of surfaces. And the process of this data in the past was done with things like analytical stereo plotters, very sophisticated, very expensive devices. Nowadays, we can use our laptop, and in many cases, we can use only our smartphone to collect some of this information. And in 1998, when we wanted to do aerial photography in the Sultanate of Oman, we had to use a lift with a film camera. Nowadays, we uplift the drone, we take photographs, and we are able to see the conditions of roofs and ceilings. So there is a big paradigm shift to a certain degree, very positive. And we have digital information systems. This is an example of Pierre Prichard's, rest in peace, because Pierre died a few weeks ago. In Bagan, he developed 9 volumes of very systematic inventory. And nowadays we're using information systems such as ARCHES developed by the Getty Conservation Institute, which allow us to have very interactive ways of collecting data from sites and creating very comprehensive inventories. And in terms of the presentation of sites, so we have originally, plates, and we have 3-dimensional models that are used for accessibility. Nowadays, we can use robots and very sophisticated visualizations to present knowledge and values of heritage places. So it's been a big shift. Now, with this increase of technology, and to a certain degree, we can say democratization of the use of technology, there are also issues that are very important to address, like the increased pace of technology, the use of big data, and the issues about longevity and fragmentation of data, posterity, provenance, and nowadays the use of automatization of using artificial intelligence. And then the ethics of digital assets in heritage. For instance, that the digital file, the digital asset should not become the monument. The monument is the site, the place. We should prevent the digital appropriation of knowledge. We need to ensure longevity and transmission. We should not use that. When we do our work, we do not do digital preservation. I don't do any preservation by just making everything digital, okay? And then another issue that happens a lot to us is a lack of transparency. So how do we know how places were recorded or documented? And I came across this issue a few weeks ago working in Ukraine, is that we have this digital aggregation. We have colleagues that maybe they have a good intention, but they don't realize that by just collecting the surface of a building or historic building, we're actually protecting it. So in some cases we are not. And we are also, I don't like this new idea of digital collection. So we have this digital collection. So I, company one, non-for-profit one, etc. I have a collection of 200 sites because we don't have a collection. The person that should have the collection is the site custodian, the right holder of the site. Those are the ones that should be able to use that digital data in an effective way. And obviously, as I was saying before, we collect partial information of the sites. We don't collect full information of the sites when we're using the techniques. And there is an analytical part, an interpretative part that we need to conduct very rigorously in our work. And then digital files have obsolescence. So how can we prevent that longevity issues of digital assets produce? And methodological errors, so having technical reports on how we conduct the work, having transparency will allow us to identify if there are methodological errors that have been happening while we were conducting our work. And sometimes when we use digital data, let's face it, we don't collect everything. There is also a kind of integrity of the data. In this particular case, you see that we collected some data from this church in Ukraine, but the scanner did not pick up anything in the roof, right? So we don't have that data, and we need to be clear about the scope of work that we have conducted. And then in terms of the provenance and reliability, well, the files that we produce, we should tell what they are. This is an ortho-corrected image from the burial chamber of Tutankhamun. that we collected in 2017. So we need to tell people about how the data have been collected and what is the record that we have produced. And then digital data and the use of digital data effectively for the conservation also has an impact on the organization that works with this data. And also there is an issue about institutional memory. How can we have that data collected in a sensible way? But, you know, why do I do all this? And I think that that's, you know, part of my kind of feeling of why we are doing this. And obviously the SIPA Heritage Documentation Committee of ICOMOS and ISPRS, because very interesting for other, so our SIPA is very different from other committees in ICOMOS, because we have two parents. We have the International Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, ISPRS, and we have ICOMOS, International Council of Monuments and Sites. These two organizations founded SIPA. So SIPA sits into this technical aspect and this conservation aspect, right? And we have been around for more than 50 years, meaning that we are a very long-standing committee that has been around. And if we look, I did this slide for a conference that I was invited in spring in Portugal, where we were reflecting about the Charter of Venice. And you can see this photograph from 1964 of the Charter of Venice participants. And now you can see the SIPA Emerging Professionals Leadership Team. So we have a very strong emerging professionals team in our committee. And you can see obviously a big difference. There is diversity, there is, you know, a lot of gender balance, there is a lot of different backgrounds, etc. So I think that that's something that I really like about SIPA, is that we have this very inclusive approach where we, you know, have our emerging professionals, all our members of the board, etc., have become, you know, part of it to a large degree. And then obviously the people that we train and that we have been working, obviously as an academic, as a mentor by nature, in teaching, I have been able to come across many people. And here you see some pictures, obviously, of some of my students that now have succeeded to be, you know, in other organizations, like for instance, Ona Vilekis, who is now the Secretary General of SIPA, and also working in the Abu Dhabi Department of Culture and Technology, of Asilis Van de Sande, who is an entrepreneur in a company, and you know, Damiano and Elisa are currently PhD students of mine in the university, Adam, who is one of our researchers in Carleton, and Luigi Barasetti, a close collaborator, professor of Milan, and Alice Palladini, who is also working for the same company as Asilis. So I think that this is actually quite revealing when we work in ICOMOS. So in one sense, in ICOMOS, we are there to exchange ideas, but we're also there to mentor and to provide opportunities. And that has been, for me, a life-changing experience with ICOMOS, being able to exchange with other people and also collaborate. And then the last picture that you see in the middle is from my last jungle mission in 2023 with the Institute of Anthropology and History in Colombia, that we went to Chiribiquete, and there we were collaborating with other colleagues doing work in a very challenging space of the world. So I guess I don't know why I have been going quite fast, but I think that obviously I also want to get some ideas out of this presentation and also get some of your feedback and questions if time permits about SIPA, etc., and about my work. But to wrap up, some of the messages that I can take on from my life-changing experience with ICOMOS, with SIPA, being an expert, is that we need to be able to also address issues, multiple issues of cultural heritage, such as understanding, you know, to record intangible dimensions of the architectural heritage. For instance, how is it built? Not only working, you know, with the tangible aspects. I also consider that digital assets must be always at the service of the heritage, rather than the heritage being at the service of the digital assets. We need to promote responsible use of technologies for heritage conservation. We need to commit to mentor and support emerging professionals as ICOMOS members. This is also in our ethical commitments in ICOMOS. In terms of our work, and in particular in the documentation work, we need to have an ethical approach. We need to respect communities, and we need to provide qualified work to the kind of activities that we do. And we need to raise awareness of the prevailing need to make concerted efforts worldwide in the growing field of technology for heritage, meaning that technology has a place, recording digital assets of cultural heritage and producing them has a place, but it should not replace the site, and should also be at the service of the site custodians, the right holders of that particular site, because why are we actually collecting the data? That should be the overarching question that we do. Why are we collecting this data? Is this data actually going to be beneficial or changing the way that the site is there? So these are kind of my take-ons of the activities. But before I kind of conclude, I want to tell you that if you are not a member of ICOMOS Canada, I invite you to join ICOMOS and make your own footprint, as I have, humbly done throughout my 27 years plus of experience. And ICOMOS Canada is basically a place to join. We are a very inclusive organization. I'm always impressed by the things that we can produce together. And then as a member of ICOMOS Canada, you can become, if you're interested in heritage documentation, then you can become a member of the scientific committee of SIPA or many other committees that are there. Now, in SIPA, we're currently working on the updating of the principles that actually where Robin Letelier conducted these principles. They were called in the past the principles for the recording of monuments, groups of buildings and sites. It was adopted by ICOMOS in Sofia in 1996. And now we are currently working on updating them to be called Principles for Recording Cultural Heritage, to be adopted in the General Assembly of 2026. And here you can see some of the discussions we're having. We're working on the preamble, purpose, definitions, reasons. If anyone is interested in knowing more about the principles, you can reach out to me or to any of our colleagues in SIPA. We are currently working on that revision. And in the summer, at the end of the summer of next year, we will have our 2025 SIPA Symposia, which will be organized in Seoul in Korea, organized by KAIST, which is a technical university in Korea, the Cultural Heritage Administration in Korea, although it has changed names, the National Research Institute of Cultural Heritage. And actually, I forgot to mention also the museum, the Korean Museum of Cultural Heritage is also one of the organizers. And the conference will be 1 week dealing with the digital uses of recording, information systems, artificial intelligence. So if you're interested, you can reach out to the organizers or myself. I'm part of the, also the organizing committee of this event. And now, if you are an emerging professional, if you have less than 10 years in this field, you can also join our SIPA Heritage Documentation Emerging Professionals Working Group or team, which is actually quite active, and they organize many activities. Actually, the Emerging Professionals team organizes something, present your thesis to people, or I don't know if that's probably not the exact name, I'm sorry to do that, but it's basically that emerging scholars, students, they can present their thesis online, and they can have an international audience, and they can get feedback. We also organize webinars. We have a newsletter that is going to be released soon. So there are many activities that are organized by SIPA and so on. So with this, I guess that I can kind of conclude. I don't know, Mathieu, if I have taken just very little time, but I think that it will be cool to have some room for discussions and so on. I guess one last thing before we go. So becoming member of SIPA is very easy. You can become a SIPA member just by going to the website and becoming a member. Now, if you want to be a SIPA expert member or emerging professional, obviously you need to be a member of ICOMOS or ISPRS or both, okay? So that's, I think, very important to mention. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and looking forward, to questions and discussions.
Thank you very much, Mario. No, that's perfect. I mean, the idea is always to have the conference between 12:15 and 1 o'clock, so people can go back to their lives, works, and lunch. So we do have time for some discussions, and there's a question popping. You can ask your question with the Q&A module in Zoom. So feel free to write your questions there. There is a question. There was first Michel who corrected that CHA and RICH are not involved anymore, just the National Museum of Korea for SIPA 2025. So just to clarify that. Thanks, Michel. We have a question from Ali Asgari. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and great work. I have a question about the data sharing policy within the heritage documentation. Overall, what is the current policies on open data sharing related to heritage?
Well, Ali, thank you for your question. That's really relevant. I would say that there shouldn't be any data sharing unless there is an explicit permission of the site custodians, or how they are called now, right holders, in this data being shared with others. I give you an example. So if you go to the SIMS website where we showcase many of our projects, you would have access to seed of our data. Why? Because the data is very sensitive. It has been collected for a particular reason, and it shouldn't be shared. Now, that doesn't mean that the data should not be stored in maybe in a public archive. Maybe it should be stored in in a place that could be accessible to others. But the permissions to have access to that data should be controlled, and that is in meeting some of the, you have the FAIR and the care principles, and I invite you to look at the care principles that things, there should be a control to the access. Now, I am not, I know that many of my colleagues in the field have these, open archives for digital data. Some of my colleagues actually say that we should be sharing everything. But I mean, we have a lot of people that have not good intentions like we do, okay? There is looting, there is conflicts, there is contested narratives. So one has to be very careful with that type of idea. Yeah.
It reminds me a little, actually, of the situation in archaeology, where it's well known and accepted for the in archaeology that all the data can't be public because of obvious reasons to protect the site. So basically, what you're saying is that we need something that can be understood a bit as information in archaeology. I mean, everything recorded should be the existence should be known, but the content should be controlled in some cases.
Yes, and well, obviously there are other issues, and actually with my colleague Ona Vilekis, we did a research for UNESCO about digital assets in the Arab states, and we identified that most of the assets are outside the region. So that reveals that there is a problem, right? So if the digital asset is not actually with the people in the region, then what is going on, right? So I think that it's really important that we have a good, how they call it, data management plan. Basically, where is the data going to be stored for posterity? There's the archaeology data services in the UK where you can store data if you pay, etc. That's one interesting experience that they're using, but the data is controlled. The access is controlled, but it's there for availability.
Okay. Michel, a bit on the same topic, but asking what do you think should happen to digital collections that are being kept by site custodians?
Yes, I think that obviously that goes into that digital appropriation. I have there are so many examples of digital appropriation, and what is really interesting is that people do not get it. They don't get it. I was coming across another organization that is collecting data from Ukraine and are asking money for people to donate for them to collect more data. And I was thinking, but I don't know. Is not, I don't think that that's the best approach to do it. I don't know. I am not a lawyer, but I think that there are many ethical and legal conflicts that one has to be resolved before. Because it might be the same as stealing the crown of a very important archaeological site, right? So I own it, but now that I have the digital asset, I also own it, right? So I can produce replicas, etc. I don't know.
Question from Cesar Cortes, saying that you mentioned the importance between the digital information versus the monuments itself and the importance of the monuments. But in conflict areas such as Ukraine, Syria, Iran, where for the moment, the only solution to preserve the monuments sometimes is the digital data that has more impact on the monuments that may not exist anymore. Would you say it is a good solution to this scenario?
No, it's not good. It's not a good solution, Cesar, because we are not asking, by doing less scanning or taking photos of the outside of the monument, we're actually not preserving them. So for instance, in the San Sofia project that we are collaborating as an ICOMOS with UNESCO, we are producing data in a conflict area for the emergency plan, for the risk preparedness plan. I think that that's more useful than just making a three-dimensional replica, put it in some kind of digital museum, and then proclaim that I have preserved the site. No, in conflict areas, digital data should be utilized to preserve the site. It should be utilized for the risk preparedness, for the emergency planning, to understand the level of damage that has occurred. And obviously, we have digital data that have been collected from places that were burned, like Notre Dame. And obviously, the digital data had a good role. But look at Notre Dame. Not only the digital data had a good role there, the role was there because we have all the skills to be able to reconstruct it. Because in France, the government of France has a program in which people are mentored to be able to do timber framing, etc. So as I said, we can not only document the surface, we also need to document the way that things are built. So otherwise, why are we just recording the aspects?
Yeah, but that's quite important that what you're saying because actually, if I understand well, I mean digital recording is not only on the structure. So the paradigm shift you were explaining is a big part, and it's like the top of the iceberg we're seeing with new technologies and drone and so on. But all the documentation of practices, knowledge that maybe haven't shifted that much as the technology for the structure part is also very important. And maybe I don't know. I have the feeling that it may be forgotten in most of the digitalization program. Is it the case? Do you see
Yes,
that?
it is. It is. It's incredible that people don't think about the craftsmanship documentation, And we conducted a project with Parks Canada a few years ago during COVID, in which we did like digital video of blacksmith work and timber framing. And there is an initiative by the British Museum called is AEMKP, Endangered Material Culture, something like that, where they give funding for people to document the stuff, and among that, also construction approaches, etc. Yes, I think. Yes, not only documenting the surface, but this seems to be the intention. Obviously, in many groups, is documenting the exterior and then claiming that this is the way we should go. And it's not. It's not, obviously.
Okay. From John Ward, regarding access to data being controlled, which is understood, does this extend to documents prepared using these data, such as plans, elevation, section of historic sites and buildings?
Yes, it should extend to everything, right? It should extend to the byproducts, right? So we have the raw data, and then we have this byproduct that we produce, measure drawings, digital images, a three-dimensional point cloud, etc. Those aspects, I mean, also need to have a restricted access. And obviously, I mean, you can have public archives. Like, I mean, you can go to the library here, the library here in Ottawa, and you can get a lot of the data, right, that has been digitized, etc. But you have to come through that filter of obtaining access to the data. And why is it that you are getting that access? Okay.
Okay. We have two other very interesting questions. The first one coming from Dalisom Mwanza, sorry. Coming from the context of Edmonton, Alberta, many of our historic sites have been at risk of demolition, often from provincial or municipal pressures. How can digital heritage recording be used as advocacy tool?
I think, Daliso, that's really important. I think that digital technologies can be instrumental, to raise awareness of the importance of, of documenting, of preserving sites. And in ICOMOS, we have instruments such as the heritage alerts, which is, we only use photographs and paragraphs, but obviously also advocating the share of knowledge, etc. With my students in Carleton and elsewhere, I have taught also in Athabasca and the Université de Montréal, among others in Canada. We document sites that are not very important sometimes. We do a small house, a building that is not really listed in the most sophisticated protection tool, and that we provide some support and access through students, right? So that's maybe a way of promoting. Obviously, I come back to my answer that the right holder should be acknowledged that we are doing this documentation process. So sometimes I cannot do a three-dimensional model of a building that is going to collapse because the site custodian wants to neglect it, right? It's tricky to do that. I have done it in the past. I might not be proud of myself completely, but yes, it happens, but not the best way to do
it. From Andrew Mayer, thank you for sharing your experience, Mario. How is the architectural documentation for conservation typically founded? Venus Mill Yukon, for example, I'm asking as we manage the Old Museum of Canada National Historic Site in Oil Springs, and have interest in documenting the industrial heritage of the site.
That's a very good question, Andrew. Basically, for instance, the project in the Venus Mill was an initiative of the Yukon government, so we worked in partnership with them. We have done many projects in Canada, some of them obviously financed by the local government, the regional government, the federal government. But something interesting that we have done too is that Canada, there is an organization called MITAX, and they have an Accelerate program. And that one matches funding with non-for-profit companies and municipalities to be able to match funding to do work. You can do all kind of work. And actually, I was reviewing one grant submission before in which they wanted to monitor some sites. And it was a university partnering with one site custodian in one site. So these kind of things are helpful. We also work under, like the Getty Conservation Institute, obviously, we work under their direction. UNESCO, we have worked under some funding trust funded by governments. We have done projects with many partners. Obviously, in our case, in the Carleton Immersive Media Studio, we do not replace the job of private companies. We always do projects that have some research hook and that bring opportunities for emerging professionals to succeed in their career, right? So that I wanted to clarify, right?
That's very interesting because I circle back to the ownership of the data, and there's probably a lot of different scenarios between governments and private companies, universities who has part of those data recollections in their own collections, as you said. And I was wondering, is there any international list or vault or repertory of what's existing already. Because I mean, some company or some university may have already a digital work on some monuments, and so but nobody's aware of it. And how you can find, if there's a way to find that, or is it something you are thinking of including in the principles, maybe?
Well, I mean, we come back to the fragmentation.
Hmm.
Fragmentation is all over the place. Data has been collected. I can tell you that I went once to one company somewhere in Europe, and they invited me and they said, we're working in this site, this site, this site. And I had worked on all the sites, and I had produced data sets for all those sites. And they were not aware of it. I was working for UNESCO at the time. They were also working for UNESCO, and they were not aware. So no, there is no central repository of the data sets. There is no structural way of knowing this. There is a lot of fragmented initiatives around the world. There are major players. Obviously, there is, obviously UNESCO. There is foundations such as Ali Foundation, Arcadia Foundation that provide funding for digital projects around the world. Um, there is, and those activities are really interesting, but nobody has really ever said, okay, let's make a whole inventory of the digital data sets that we have across the world. It could be something really interesting. I don't think it's SIPA's role. SIPA, we are a network of professionals. In our principles, we are mostly dealing with the responsibility of the job, right? So how we
Hmm.
collect the data, how we provide the provenance information, how we should archive it, where should we archive it? I mean, even if we look back at the Charter of Venice of 1964, it says that reports should be archived in public archives, accessible to researchers, right?
Hmm.
So let's go with that premise. As long as my data is somewhere else, and I unfortunately passed away or something, that data is preserved there, right?
Hmm.
So I would say that that's a condition, but no, there is no unilateral system with all the data.
Hmm. Not even standards. I imagine, with the way the data is produced and cataloged and
There
things
is a
like that.
lot of data. There is a
Hmm.
lot of standards. I sometimes I find it funny that people say, "Oh, there are no standards." God sakes, go to the Historic England website. You see the metric standards for documentation of cultural heritage.
Hmm.
It exists. You can use that one. There is the Archaeological Data Services. They have a standard of how to archive files. There is the, the International Council of
Museums.
Museums documentation committee. They also have the MIDAS standard, etc. So there is, but people, they just sometimes people reinvent the wheel. It's funny
Hmm.
that in most of the projects that are involved, when we go somewhere, we mention this and people are like surprised, like, wow, yes, it exists. Yes. And I mean, like, for instance, the European Commission, obviously, with the framework projects, they have produced a lot of initiatives
Hmm.
that can also be used, right? And they have, like Europeanas is one of the major initiatives in Europe. They do have standards, they do have ways of doing stuff. So no need to reinvent the wheel, actually.
Hmm. Well, it's already 1:06, and we have no more questions. I'd like to thank you very much, Mario. Again, that it's a wonderful discussion. There's so many discussions there. We could go on ethics and so on, but you definitely open give us food for thought. And again, I'd like to thank Catherine, Michael, and Marisa for the technical support and logistical support for these conferences. Invite you all to follow up on our social medias of ICOMOS Canada, Instagram, LinkedIn for our next conferences. Remind ICOMOS members also that we will see each other on our annual General Assembly on November 13th. So please save the date at the beginning of the afternoon on the 13th of November. So you'll be joining us to General Assembly. And see if you're not a member, consider joining ICOMOS Canada and the big ICOMOS family. So thank you very much again, Mario. Thank you, all of you, for being with us today, and hoping to see you soon on a next lunchtime conference.